Here is my list for the top 10 rivalries in rugby league as of 2025. Obviously, if I don't say one that you think should be on this list, let me know down in the comments. But at number 10, I'm going with Storm vs Sharks. This one sort of died down over the past few years. It was pretty fierce back when they played each other in the grand final. They had some pretty feisty games, although I still think it just cracks the top 10. In ninth place, we've got a Western Sydney derby. I've gone with the Tigers and the Eels. Obviously, they got Easter Monday when they play each other, and they've also had the Spoon Bowl last year when they played each other. They always drag out a big crowd to their game, and again, just like Sharks and Storm, just scraped into my top 10. In 8th spot, I've gone with Dragons and Roosters. Very historic rivalry they've got here. They obviously have the traditional Anzac Day game that they play each other every year. Just a very historic rivalry. I could not leave it off this list. In 7th spot, this one might be a bit controversial. Broncos Dolphins. Trust me, give it 5 years or so, this one will definitely be top 5, maybe even top 3. They are two teams based out of Brisbane, which is a footy fanatic city. You cannot tell me that one day this will be a top rivalry in the game. It just has to be. Just got to give it time. In 6th place, I've gone with the Rabbitohs and the Bulldogs. They are kind of secondary rivalries to each other. Obviously, we'll get to this soon. Rabbitohs, their biggest rivals are the Roosters, and the Bulldogs, their biggest rivals are the Eels. But if you look at their second biggest rivals after those two sides, I say the Rabbitohs' second biggest rivals would be the Dogs, and the Bulldogs' second biggest rival would be the Rabbitohs. Both play at a core stadium, obviously have traditional Good Friday against each other where they always drag out a big crowd. It's just, I've got it in 6th place. In 5th, I've got a rivalry that's sort of died off over the past few years, and that's Storm vs Eagles. Obviously had that iconic Battle of Brookvale between Adam Blair and Glenn Stewart back in 2011, I think it was, but it's been a long time since then. And not to forget some of those grand finals they had in the late 2000s, but still to this day, whilst the rivalry is not as heated as what it used to be, they still do have some feisty games against each other every once in a while. In 4th place, I've gone with Bulldogs and Eels, just a fun game for anyone who supports those sides. This rivalry began in the 1980s where they played a lot of grand finals against each other, and it's still lived on to this day. Always drag out a big crowd when they play each other, always very heated between the fan bases, but that's a good thing. We love to see this in rivalries. In 3rd place, I've gone Broncos and Cowboys, the Queensland Derby. I still think this is the top rivalry of all the Queensland sides, even though it's kind of died off the last few years. But you look back 10 years ago when these teams were just always having golden point. Every time these two played, it was always coming down to the final moments. But for the time being, I still think this is the best rivalry out of all the Queensland sides. In 2nd place, I've gone with the Battle of the West, the main Battle of the West being the Eels and the Panthers, only played in a grand final a couple of years ago. Eels are one of the only sides that can seem to always compete with Penrith, no matter how bad the Eels are going. Always a very, very entertaining game when these two go up against each other, and I've got it in my number 2 spot. And then number 1, you all know it's coming. It's the Rabbitohs and the Roosters. They're the only two original clubs from 1908 that still exist in the competition. Been fierce rivals for hundreds of years. They're located in pretty much the exact same area. They're basically just next door neighbours. Always just very heated and fiery between the fan bases. Every time they play each other, something controversial happens on the field. And it always drags in a big crowd, so that is why it's in my number 1 spot.